The race to trade for Matthew Stafford is down to two teams. We'll tell you who they are and who his best fit is on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the data queen, Michelle Majuk. On today's episode, we're going to talk about all of these veterans who are trying to find a trade. Deebo Samuel, Harold Landry, Jaire Alexander, and of course, Matthew Stafford for the Rams. Before we dive in, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Michelle, as much as this Matthew Stafford situation perplexes me, it seems like we're starting to get a little bit of clarity as to where things might go. And our guys over at Locked On Rams talked about where the situation is right now.
All of a sudden, Travis, the Rams somehow, some way have one of the top storylines this season in the National Football League. What could be one of the biggest dominoes, which is a potential Super Bowl winning quarterback with a couple years left in his career to chase those Super Bowls that could be made available. And the big news last week was that the Rams allowed his agent, Jimmy Sexton, to go out there and communicate with other teams about a potential contract they would give him, because if he gets traded, he needs to be under a new contract. He's not going to be playing under his current deal. And just to kind of rewind, I mean, where it all started is last year, they renegotiated his deal where it was a $23.5 million guaranteed salary in 2024, a $12.5 million signing bonus, a $4 million guarantee for the March roster bonus. And essentially, it took away his guaranteed money from 2025 to make it a one-year, $40 million deal in 2024. We knew they were going to have to return to the negotiating table in 2025, and that's where they're at.
And obviously things aren't going very well, because we're hearing more and more every single day that Matthew Stafford is likely to be traded. And we're hearing now that there are two teams in particular that are really banging on the door to get Stafford. It's the New York Giants and the Las Vegas Raiders. So, Michelle, out of those two teams, who do you think would be the best fit for Matthew Stafford if he had to be traded to one of the two?
I mean, he's hanging out with Tom Brady in a ski resort in Montana. They just happened to run into each other. You know, it wasn't planned at all. They just happened to run into each other. I guess the Raiders, I don't know. Like the Giants, they have the number 3 overall pick. So they really should just be going rookie quarterback. I don't think they're just a Matthew Stafford away from making a Super Bowl run. I really don't. And also, at this point, I kind of get why the Rams wouldn't want to pay Stafford $50 million either, with the age of just turning 37 years old, with the injuries as of late. And also, like, I think he came into LA underrated because of all his losses with the Lions on a bad team. I do think over the last few years, he's overrated.
That's a Sean McVay comment right there.
I think he's still fine. He's still above average quarterback for sure. He should still be a starter in this league. But I mean, over the last 3 seasons, he's thrown 54 touchdowns. He had 41 in 2021, a 92 passer rating over the last 3 seasons. It was 103 passer rating in that 2021 season. 22 wins over the last 3 seasons, had 12 in that first one. And his production under pressure this year was one of the worst in the league. He was only better than like Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson under pressure this year in passer rating. So you saw his struggles with mobility a little bit with his age when he was getting pressured. And I just don't know if the production's going to be there for $50 to $60 million a year, which is probably what he wants.
And if he wants a new deal, then that's going to be multiple years too. So are you giving Matthew Stafford a 2-year, $105 million contract, or God forbid, 3 years, 150? I've had someone recently, of course, online fans can be crazy, say, Matthew Stafford can play for another 5 years. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. Like, Matthew Stafford has had injury problems. He's not a super mobile guy to be able to escape hits at this age. I know your mobility will fade, but he wasn't a mobile quarterback in his prime. So he's definitely not one now. And both of the teams that we're talking about have shaky offensive line situations. What I will say is, I do think that the Giants are the better fit over the Raiders. I think with the Tom Brady story, I think it's probably more likely he goes to the Raiders now. But I actually do think that the Giants are the best fit for him just because they have some more talent on the roster. If you look, I know Max Crosby is there, but like you have Malik Neighbors, you have Andrew Thomas at left tackle, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line. Yeah, I think that the Giants are a better team right now, which would probably make more sense for Matthew Stafford. Maybe he could raise the level of that team. But honestly, to me, the team that makes the most sense for Matthew Stafford remains the Los Angeles Rams. I know that they probably don't want to pay him that money, but it doesn't sound like anybody really wants to willingly do that other than maybe desperate teams like the Giants and the Raiders. But if you're Matthew Stafford, to me, this is I already won a championship. I want one more last payday. I don't care if I win. And I guess that's just surprising to me.
If I'm Stafford, I want to stay with the Rams for sure. And if I had to take a little bit less, because your best chance at winning another Super Bowl, it is with the Rams. Like yes. you go to the Giants and you're getting a way worse team, way worse coaching, but then also having to face a really tough division with the Eagles and the Commanders and the Cowboys with Dak Prescott likely healthy for this year. And then if you don't want to go to the AFC, especially in Patrick Mahomes' division. So like if you're playing with the Raiders, you're never going to win.
Two other playoff teams. Like everyone made the playoffs but you.
And even if you do get through the playoffs in your own division, you're not beating the Josh Allens and Lamar Jacksons and the Joe Burrows. Like that's such a harder path when you're in the NFC West right now with my 49ers, struggling last year. You don't know if they'll bounce back, but also the Seahawks and the Cardinals, they're not a threat. Like the Rams can easily be the best team in this division again if they keep Stafford. So I think for both sides, it makes sense just to keep him as long as he's not asking for $50 to $60 million a year. Like if he's willing to just take a little bit less, I think Stafford should want to stay there. And the Rams, I mean, what are you going to do if you move on from Stafford? Go get Sam Darnold, get Aaron Rodgers, who's older and worse. Like, I don't know.
And calling the Giants right now because the people he thought he would have interest from originally, not really all that interested. Yeah, if you're the Rams and you want to win and they're a winning organization who always tries to go for it, like I would just be shocked if the Rams just accepted, we're not doing anything this year. We're not going to like make any kind of crazy move at quarterback or anything like that. We'll go get Aaron Rodgers on a 1-year deal. Like, I'm sorry, that perplexes me. Now, the Sam Darnold thing, I do think, now I don't think this is smart. I would rather pay Matthew Stafford 2 years, $50 million a year than give Sam Darnold a 3-year contract worth $150. Like, there's no question about it, even with the age and the injuries. Like, Stafford is a guy who, at his best, is still a top 10 quarterback in the NFL when he's playing good football. That game against the Eagles, he was incredible in that game. So, I would just be shocked. But if I tell you what I think the Rams do actually truly want to do, I think they do want to go out and get Sam Darnold.
I think for Sam Darnold's sake, you better hope that Stafford gets traded because I think that's the one singular landing spot he could find this offseason where he'd actually have a chance to succeed like he did with the Vikings. If he goes to pretty much any other team, he's going to go back to being terrible like he was with the Jets and the Panthers. But I think with Sean McVay and that system, Sam Darnold could have a good season like he had with Kevin O'Connell. That's what he needs. He needs a great play caller and a great system. So that would be the one landing spot. That would make sense for Sam Darnold. But if you're going to do that, I say just pay Stafford a couple of years and, try to find a young guy in the draft to build once Stafford's gone.
100%. That would be my plan too. But definitely the most interesting storyline in the NFL right now. But it's not the only storyline because there are a lot of players trying to find a new home in the NFL this offseason. All right, Michelle, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Again, we talked about Matthew Stafford and his potential trade, but we got some big news on 2 different players in the NFL that will officially be looking for a new home on Wednesday, and it's Jaire Alexander from the Green Bay Packers and then Harold Landry from the Tennessee Titans. We're going to start with Jaire Alexander, but before we do, Michelle, I have to tell you that I found it so funny that in both the Harold Landry tweet and the Jaire Alexander tweet, when that news broke that both of those guys were given permission to look for a trade to another team, both of those tweets said, still young at 28 years old and a former Pro Bowler. Absolutely hilarious to color it that way. But before I really go crazy on that point, my guy Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers talked about the Jaire Alexander situation.
My guess is how this is going to go and then how this will be reported out after the fact. The Packers will meet with Jaire Alexander's agent this week. They will say, we want to cut in pay, or we're just going to cut the player. You're going to get more money from us than someone else. So let's see if we can come to an agreement. But remember what happened with Aaron Jones. Around this time, they had conversations. It seemed like they were working toward a solution. And then by the end of the combine, really, we didn't hear about this until March, but really in February, the team knew, Aaron Jones knew, this was not in a good place. Remember, the Packers can't trade, if they want to trade Jaire Alexander, until March anyway. They're not going to release him. I don't believe they are going to release him. They are going to try to find a trade partner if that is where they land. I don't think that's fait accompli. Again, I mentioned the leaks and the things that were said in the building. I think this is the most likely scenario, is that this is over. It's not a done deal, though. And if the Packers really wanted Jaire Alexander back, they would say it.
And they didn't say it. And as a matter of fact, it's the total opposite, because they gave him permission to seek a trade, proving that they don't want him back. Jaire Alexander wants to be traded so that he could keep his current salary, which is going to pay him a lot more than if he were cut and then went out on the market. Because the reality is, I believe it's like 3 of the last 4 years, he's played 7 games or fewer. I'm sorry, I don't care how many former Pro Bowls you have. I don't care if you're still 28. The guy simply does not play football. So I know from a Packers standpoint, it's like, yeah, let's trade him. But why would any team give up anything to take Jaire Alexander on for the current money that he's making and deal with the issues with injury? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, they might have to cut him if they don't want him because of the contract price, right? Like, I think a team would be happy to send over a 6th, 7th round pick for Jaire. It's not that's not the point, right? It's what they also have to pay him. And if you, I mean, people would trade for him in a heartbeat and pay him if they knew he was going to play 16, 17 games, right? Or even like 13, 14, 15. The issue is, since 2021, it's been 4 games played. He did play a full season basically in 2022 with 16 games. And then 7 games and 7 games the last 2 seasons. You just can't miss that much time and expect other teams to want that. I will say his last 2 healthy seasons that he's played more than 7 games, the 15-game season, the 16-game season in 2020 and 2022. He was a second-team All-Pro in both of those seasons. I was going to say Pro Bowler, but that seems to not matter anymore with some of the guys that got picked this year. But second-team All-Pro, I mean, that's really good. I do think when he's healthy on the field, he's one of the best corners out there. I still think he has it in him. And I do think being only 28, that's typically these guys' prime. It's just, how are you going to feel comfortable trading for him and paying him with how little he's been on the field?
Yeah, the only way that you could do it is if you give up so little draft compensation that it's like you didn't give up anything for the draft and you're just taking the player to pay him, and the financial risk is the only part of the risk. But I think about it like the Marshawn Lattimore trade that happened during the season. I believe that was a 5th round pick, 4th round pick, day 3 pick. And I think right around there would make sense, probably a little less. But Marshawn Lattimore has had his fair share of injury issues as well. And they continued and lingered while he was with the Washington Commanders. And I wonder if that gives some of these teams out there thinking about making this move a little bit of pause, seeing Marshawn Lattimore, who got back on the field and played, but definitely wasn't fully healthy when he showed up in Washington. The only teams that would make sense for me to go get a Jaire Alexander is a team that is in immediate contention, a team that is ready to go right now. And you know, Detroit made a lot of additions on their secondary last year and in recent years in the draft. Obviously, Philly has good corners. Maybe you go to like a rival in the NFC North. You go to like Minnesota. They could use some cornerback help in Minnesota. So maybe Alexander goes there. There's a clear pipeline of washed Green Bay Packers going to the Vikings. So maybe that would make some sense. In the AFC, Rasul Douglas is a free agent. Maybe Buffalo would make that move. That could be an option as well. Baltimore always is willing to take talented players who are in disgruntled situations and see what happens. So there might be a market for him, but I think he only makes sense for a contending team that was contending last year too.
Yeah, and I will say, as much as I'm like, oh, well, Jaire Alexander's always, not healthy, who would want him? Like, I mean, as a Steelers fan, the team I hate the most is the Ravens. And if they were to trade for Jaire Alexander, I'd be like, of course they got him. Like, I would be mad because the chance of him being healthy and when he is healthy is so good. I do think there's a lot of teams that would want him. Like you mentioned, the Ravens, the Bills, the Bengals could really use a good corner.
Yes.
The 49ers, Tarvarius Ward's likely out the door.
Yeah.
Would they trade him to, I feel like Green Bay and 49ers have this weird rivalry. Would they trade him there? But there's a lot of teams that would want him. It's just the Packers have to, talk a team into like, no, he'll be healthy. I promise.
Yeah, that has to be the major risk with this. But you're right. He is a very good player when he's healthy. It just hasn't happened in a while. But moving right along from Jaire Alexander to a little bit of home cooking for me, Harold Landry. That was the biggest news early in the morning, the first piece of big news we got on the day on Wednesday. Harold Landry has been given permission to seek a trade for the Tennessee Titans to try to find a new home. Obviously, Michelle, my squad, I've been a big proponent of Harold Landry, but the reality is at this stage, even though he's 28, he'll be 29 soon, he just simply doesn't have the burst and the explosion that you need on the edge. He had 9 sacks last year, but he was like dead last in the NFL in pass rush win rate and pressure rate. So it was like all cleanup sacks, all, coverage sack stuff. It's not him winning one-on-one against tackles. So it's another situation where Harold Landry, in theory, could help a team that has a need on the edge, but his salary this year is about $13 million. And quite frankly, he was one of the worst starting edges in the NFL last year. I get that a team might need some edge help, and he has versatility to drop in coverage, so that could be scheme versatile. But it's another situation like with Jaire Alexander where I just don't see a team actually making the move. And I think ultimately, like what you said, I think the player gets cut at the end of the day. It's clear the team doesn't want him back on the money. The player could be soured on the team because of the ending. And I just don't think that Harold Landry is a good enough player that anybody will actually give up anything for him.
There are some teams and some coaches out there that I feel like might be blinded by the sack, numbers, right? 12, 10 and a half, 9, the last 3 seasons played.
Yeah.
I mean, those aren't easy numbers to get. And even if a lot of them, do come easy for him because it's just cleanup, but it's still hard to continually get 9+ sacks in how many seasons that he has.
And motor matters. You know what I mean? Like you get cleanup sacks and coverage sacks because you continue to hustle throughout out the whistle. So there is some level of important skill involved in getting those numbers.
But to go off of what you said, he did get a 49.6 PFF pass rush grade this year. One of the worst among edge rushers, real bad. So they agree with you that it wasn't really him doing much for those 9 sacks. Mm-hmm. I will say, even if he was fantastic, right? I do think this is kind of the time for the Titans to be selling off any pieces they can. And Harold Landry is one of the biggest names they have, if not the biggest, especially on defense. And I mean, like you said, 29 years old in June. It's time. They're not even close to winning a Super Bowl, right? Get rid of him while you can. If any team's willing to pay for him, if they are able to trade him, I think that's a smart idea and they should be doing it. Yeah,
they need to get as much draft capital as they can. And another factor here is this is an incredible draft class at the edge. So that's another factor of, the Titans should look to move on because it's such a great edge rusher class. You can get 2, you could double dip at that position like the Titans need to. But on the other side of that, why would any of these teams give up a pick for this guy who's going to be 29 this summer when it's such a deep edge rusher class? Like, just draft one in round 4, you know what I mean? Or draft one in round 5 rather than giving up a pick for Harold Landry. So it's an interesting situation. Hopefully the Titans can get a pick out of it because, it's just a little home cooking for me. But I got to tell you that I really, really doubt it. But there are some more players who could get moved, who have permission to seek a trade. And Michelle knows about one of them very, very well. And I got a feeling that she's not very high on the player who may be available. All right, Michelle, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL, talking about trade options all the buzz from the combine, Matthew Stafford, Jaire Alexander, Harold Landry. But now I want to go to Michelle's neck of the woods, or second team, the San Francisco 49ers, because Deebo Samuel is a guy that is heavily involved in the trade discussion right now. And our guys over at Locked On 49ers talked about the situation.
So, Croc, the 49ers might swing a deal or two of their own this offseason, and they have allowed Deebo Samuel to seek a trade. And according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, there have been numerous teams that have been in conversation and have expressed some interest in Deebo Samuel, with preliminary talks on a potential trade that could happen between now and March 22nd is one of the dates that could be a little bit of a soft deadline, because there's a bonus structure for Deebo Samuel in his contract on that date. So we'll see if by basically exactly a month, if Deebo Samuel is traded. Probably will happen before March 22nd. There's still potential that he could get released, but Deebo is such an interesting case because he's a little different than everybody else at wide receiver, and he's a little bit of different player. So I think that the trade market for him is a little different as well, because if you're looking for Deebo Samuel, you're looking for something specific.
Now, specifically, Michelle, what are you getting in Deebo Samuel at this stage?
Nothing, right? You're getting a wide receiver that cannot run routes, cannot get open intermediate, and also you never know which games he's going to try or phone it in. But this year it was particularly bad for him. And, maybe it's the weight he put on. They said he put on 20 pounds over the season, but he had a career low 1.6 yards per route run this year. To compare that to a great player in the league, Puka Nacua, he averaged 3.6 yards per route run, 2 more yards per route run. But his tight window percentage increased because he couldn't get open this year at all. 21% of his targets were in a tight window. He had the lowest speed at target in miles per hour this past year in his career, averaged the fewest yards after catch per reception, the fewest yards after catch over expectations per reception in his career by far. And he just added nothing to the team. Honestly, the games they used him, it was like every time he touched the ball, it was a negative play for the 49ers. It did not help them. He had like one good game all year long where he actually showed up. I don't think he has anything left in him. I think that 2021 year was special. We haven't seen him close to that since, and he's not going to come back.
And I think, people talk during his quote unquote prime about how the versatility, running the ball like that, being used as a running back, the way they use him in the screen game and get the ball in his hands, like he's just taking a lot of hits. And if you're not a guy who is like supremely taking care of your body to deal with that, then it can go very, very quickly in the NFL. So this is another example of, look, if the team is saying you have our permission to go seek a trade, then every other team in the NFL knows, well, they don't want that guy back. So why don't they want him back? And it's like, oh, if you start to investigate like the numbers that you're bringing up here, it's like, oh, they don't want him back because he sucks and he's getting paid too much money. So why would a team trade for him? Now, I would say a team that has a ton of cap space, that needs a wide receiver bad, that may not be able to get their hands on like T. Higgins, which still hasn't been tagged by the Bengals officially. And he tweeted out the cap emoji. So that might be something that we have to get into tomorrow's show or next week. But maybe the New England Patriots, who had A.J. Brown with Mike Vrabel for the Tennessee Titans. Deebo Samuel, not as good of a player as A.J. Brown, but they definitely do offer the same kind of physicality and yards after catch ability, at least in theory, with Deebo Samuel. I know you're saying that he's basically washed, but in theory, so maybe Mike Vrabel and the New England Patriots would be a team that would save Deebo Samuel and let him keep his money and get paid. But that's really the only like clean fit that makes sense to me.
I also think the 49ers are waiting to see what teams are willing to offer, because if it's not a good enough offer, I think they'll just cut him, because there's a lot of dead cap there on his contract. Right. And they're able to spread that out if they cut him and do it like a post June 1. If they trade him, though, they're going to have to that dead cap is going to fuel them all this year. So the flexibility of what to do with his remaining money owed, way more flexible if they were to just cut him. So I think the only way he gets traded is if there's too good of an offer to refuse, and we will deal with the money, right? I don't think he gets traded. I think he gets cut.
Yeah, it's really just how dumb could another team be? Yeah. You never know until you ask. You know what I mean? Like that's why everybody, and Michelle, obviously, not only an NFL expert, but a fantasy football expert as well. You know that sometimes you just got to send some bad trades and see if the dummy in your league will accept it.
Absolutely.
They can't make a mistake if you don't present them with one. So maybe that's what the 49ers are thinking. There are some other players here in the NFL that have been given permission to seek a trade. We just got recent news that Rams guard Jonah Jackson has been given permission to seek a trade. We heard Jonathan Allen from the Washington Commanders, who we talked about yesterday. Jermaine Pratt from the Bengals. It felt like forever ago at this point, but he requested a trade, which I guess Jonathan Allen not included in this. Oh, Devin Godchow from the New England Patriots also given permission to seek a trade. I just, maybe this is old man yelling at a cloud, but we're losing recipes here. There was a time where you had to be a certain level of player to seek permission to make a trade or to request a trade outright. And we got Jermaine Pratt and Devin Godchow and Jonah Jackson. I get permission to seek a trade is different from requesting a trade from the team. Like the team is telling you they don't want you. That's why you're allowed to go seek a trade. But still, at the end of the day, I'm seeing these players good players, but come on now. This should be star level activity. What are we doing here with these, just another guy players getting to request a trade and this, that? I don't know. It just bothers me. That's my only take.
That the teams love it when these guys who are below average are like, I want out of here. I want to request a trade. They're like, please do my work for me. Like, we were probably going to cut you anyways, but yeah, if you want to go see if you can get a trade, we will happily let you go. If we can get anything back for you, you go do that work for us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a driver outside of your apartment right now. Feel free. We'll head to the airport. But yeah, I'm with you there. But the point of the entire episode here is we should see some real activity very, very soon in some of these roster moves, especially we get to March on Saturday. And then the money-wise, it kind of allows teams to do a little bit more like we talked about with Jaire Alexander and the Packers and their March 1st kind of opening window. So free agency, 12 days away at this point? Things should start moving and shaking because teams need to figure out what their financial situation is so that they can go into free agency and know how much money they have to spend. So I'm excited to see what kind of news we get in the next 5 to 6 days.
I love free agency so much. It just makes me so excited when players change teams. Even the ones we're making fun of saying they're just a guy, I still get excited when players change teams.
Yeah, it's always fun. A little bit of movement, you know what I mean? Always a good time. But with that being said, that is going to do it for us today. I am your host, Tyler Rowland, the Madman, with my co-host, the Data Queen, Michelle Majuk. Thank you so much for tuning in to Locked On NFL. And as I tell you every single episode, stay safe out there.
Bye, y'all.